Greetings, everybody. Chris Hislop from the Montana World Affairs Council. Welcome to Global Perspectives on Security. This is our international affairs webcast that brings you a little bit deeper into the issues of the day. We're joined by our friend and colleague, Mick Mulroy from the Lobo Institute in Whitefish, Montana. Mick, there's a big news today about their so-called Russian insurgent attacks in southern Russia. It's all the buzz on the media. What can you tell us about what's happening in southern Russia?
So, Chris, it's very difficult to determine what is actually happening in Russia. One, because it's very controlled about what gets out of that. And it's also could be multiple different groups. I mean, there's some groups in Russia who are, shall we say, on the far right, if that's the right terminology, that don't think that Russia's doing enough to win the war. They're war supporters, but they believe that the military has basically failed the country. There's also groups that don't like the war at all and think that the Russians shouldn't be in it. They've lost over 100,000 of their young men, and they've had over 300,000 flee the country. And then, of course, you have groups that just don't want the despot of President Putin running their country. And then, of course, there's the other alternative that these are inside groups that are being sponsored by Ukrainian special operation forces or other countries' intelligence services. I don't know that to be true, but these are all potential insurgent groups, or all of them could be active right now in Russia. It is very important, at least from the Ukrainians' perspective, that they cause issues inside Russia, because that is where the major supply lines are coming in to help them sustain their efforts in Ukraine. So there's a lot of potential here, Chris.
Mick, in a lot of the media quoted a senior Ukrainian official stating something along the lines of, this kind of insurgency is inevitable in an oppressive, militarized regime. You know, what are your thoughts on its inevitability, but also what is the potential impact on the situation in Ukraine?
So I think that's a fair statement to say, when you oppress people to the extent that they are in Russia, that you are going to get groups, potentially groups that are marginalized. And I think it's important to point out that most of the Muscovites, if that's the term for people who live in Moscow, do not fight in Ukraine. They usually go out to far-flung regions and essentially recruit people then to go fight in the Donbass with very little training. So that kind of situation where marginalized groups are then, in a sense, victimized against their will by going to fight a war they probably never supported, you're going to have an insurgency, if you will, I think, eventually. So I think that it's an accurate statement on the part of the Ukrainian minister there. But I would also point out that the Ukrainians actually have plenty of interest in ensuring that this happens. I don't blame them. I certainly would if I was in their shoes, because right now they're kind of fighting with a hand tied behind their back, if you will. We have precluded them from fighting inside Russia, at least with our weapon systems. But it's very difficult to beat a country that has a safe haven right next to your country, especially when it's their country. So from a military tactics perspective, it would behoove the Ukrainians to do anything they can to create an insurgency, which could cause problems on Russia's ability to keep fighting this war.
So there's a lot of ways this insurgency can go. Mick, from your own experience and perspective, what are one or two of the most likely paths, and what would be the impact on the situation should it take that path?
So if I was involved in the insurgency itself, and if I have an expertise, it's regular warfare, I would certainly focus my efforts both on what we call shaping the battlefield. So going after logistical supply lines, going after command and control, and basically letting the Russian soldiers know that they're not safe anywhere, right? So they can run back to across the border, and they used to feel like they're safe and now they wouldn't. That's one part of it that's very specific, I think, to the counteroffensive that's coming up. And then, of course, the more that Russians feel that their government is not in control, the more likely that they will jump on a, say, nascent insurgent group, which could grow exponentially, because there is a lot of negative feelings toward not just the war itself, but the consequences of the war itself. It's essentially destroying their economy, and it is almost eradicated a whole generation of young men.
Thank you very much, Mick Mulroy from the Lobo Institute in Whitefish, Montana. You can catch Mick as an ABC News analyst on any number of other national and international media sources. Mick, thank you for lending your perspective and expertise, and also special thanks to the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, Stockman Bank, and Allegiance. They help us bring this and many more programs to you. Mick, until we talk again, thank you very much. Bye-bye.